on the ladder and he went down. A different way of doing things. So what follows is from Father John Quigley, to OFM, and that stands for the Order of Friars Minor. So that's what he really liked, the humanity and the humility of Jesus. The fact that Jesus became one of us. Philippians chapter 2, it's all there, very clearly written. So for the past 800 years, other men and women who have been inspired by the simple genius and freshness of Francis and Clare have been developing and popularizing the original Franciscan revelation. And as I said before, this is an aggiornamento, an updating, profound humanizing effect within Christianity, Western civilizations and other cultures. Where they value Francis, they tend to become gentler, kinder, more open. Not always, but there's the good chance of it. Okay. And so, if we're going to look at these things, we can list them. And there they are: simplicity, reverence, fraternity, ecumenism. Back in the 1200s, there wasn't too much of that. Ecology, interdependence, dialogue. Boy, there's a lot of making one there, isn't there? I've got another list a bit later to compare, a modern one. So, as I said, the motto and salutation is peace and goodness, peace and all good. And Francis believed that God was non-violent, God of peace. And that belief may be a simple presupposition for us today, though, boy, oh boy, there are a lot of Christians who fear God still and see this judging person. There was a song a few years ago, God is watching us from a distance. It was a popular song, good tune. But I thought, no, that just misses the whole point of Christianity. We had one brother in our order that I finally buried, and I was glad that he finally died. The last 10 or 15 years of his life were a torment. For him, the God of Jesus was more like Moloch. Big teeth, fangs, fire and smoke, completely unforgiving. Completely unforgiving. He confessed the same sins over and over and over and over. He wanted a priest just about every day. The priest got sick of it, obviously, because he'd get the sacrament and he made no difference. It was OCD, of course. But it was torment, and nothing I could do. He even confessed his sins to me. It was like being stoned with popcorn. You know, there was nothing there. He lived a very, very good life. So when he finally died, I thought, oh, you're just about to discover something really marvelous, the love of God. But that people who teach that kind of stuff, boy, I'm not keen on them. So he was at a time when the Christian church, of course, was waging crusades. There were 9 of them against the Saracens. That's the Arab Muslims. And his interpretation then of the gospel life and what it required was quite revolutionary, quite different. So I'll talk about that later, because he actually went to Egypt and met with Sultan al-Malik. as the ecumenism. He met with the Sultan in the middle of the Crusades. How he managed to do that, ooh. So, viewpoint of the poor, especially from the place of the poor, so naked, suffering Christ. So his devotion to this God was not the God of judgment and viciousness and counting costs and counting sins and quid pro quos or anything. Non-violent, poor, in the stable of Bethlehem. Again, Philippians 2. And as food in the Eucharist. In the Eucharist, basically what he was saying, I think, was, this is who I am. Just like the bread, the wheat that is ground down and needs to be ground down in order to form the bread. And just like the grapes that are ground down in order to form the... Life is tough. And I have been ground down. I have people constantly wanting me to work miracles to heal, and I've done that. People misunderstanding me, people trying to kill me all the time, being rejected by my own people because they're closed and shuttered and will not listen to and do not understand their own God. But nonetheless, he said, I become bread and wine. I nourish. And you be me. Not just do this in memory of me. What he was saying is, I won't be here tomorrow. You be me. You do this. You take what life gives you and let it form you into bread and wine for people. Become what you eat. Didn't Francis do that? Came what he had. So perfect as the Heavenly Father is perfect. Now, one of the Franciscans following him, Scotsman John Duns Scotus, had a version of that, and he said that Francis agreed with Luke's understanding of perfect as meaning merciful or compassionate. And again, those who have been with me before have heard me say, well, the Latin compassio, compassion with, suffering with, standing in solidarity with, is marvelous. It's a great idea. But Jesus, in the Greek of the original language, saying that they're like sheep without a shepherd, he had compassion on them, it's translated. But the Greek word is splagnizomai, the verb, and versions of that. And splagnizomai means to love with the eyes of a mother for a newborn baby. So he listened to the cardia, Kardia, which we just take as cardio, heart, but it was heart and head and gut. He was aware of the whole person, what was going on in them. He paid attention to them. They were the only one in his view at that time, and then he responded with the love of a mother for a newborn infant. Instant, powerful, unstoppable. So that, I believe, is therefore the idea of perfection then is a perfect lover. And the perfect lover is vulnerable, is able to be wounded, is open. The love is mutual. It is equal. And we don't get that with God. God is more. But God said, no, I love you. What are the implications of that? You know, if God is a perfect lover, cut out all this big timing and stuff and allow God to be God. So, incarnation was absolutely foundational to Franciscan worldview. It's he was the one who built the first crib. Before then, the birth of Christ had been nothing much. It was all Easter. He was born. And that, of course, left out that chapter from Philippians that said he became one of us. He did not count being with God a thing to be grasped, but instead became, well, like us. And that's so clear and so obvious that, but it was sort of shuffled off. So he created that first nativity. And so the Franciscans emphasize the incarnation. Probably they would say maybe more than redemption. Christmas more important than Easter. I don't go a lot with that, which is more important. They're both important. But certainly incarnation is important. So talking about the minores, it pained him. He couldn't get it, that love is not loved. Love itself is available for us, and we worship and we adore and we praise and we glorify and we bless, and we don't bloody well love. So that's the refectory in San Damiano. Sisters crowded in there, no heating, of course, and basic food. So yes, they were poor. So Francis said, right, God became one of us. That means we're okay. We're okay. God became one of us. God is not separate from us. God is not punishing us. We weren't put on earth in order to be treated like dirt and then made fun of. As the Greek gods and the Norse gods and all of those do. King Lear, I remember in the play, one of the lines that probably struck me, well, it did strike me the most. He said, like flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. Not the God of Jesus of Nazareth, not the God of Frank. We already have redemption. So that doesn't mean that Easter is less. It means that Easter is a natural following. And Jesus showed us how to do that, how to claim that. He left us a blueprint. Good to be a human being. And to remember that we are human beings. We are not angels. We are not God. God expects that we will put our foot in it. God expects that we'll only open our mouth to change feet.
I think this fits in with my thought for the week. I was saying the Brittany of Our Lady is that Queen conceived without original sin. I guess that is thought, what about the rest of us? So I went and did some homework, and first, the idea of it comes up in about 2nd century. Augustine makes a big deal of it. It's not there in the beginning. Original sin is something that's been put on us, concept that's been put on us. So get rid of original sin's gone. I've got to work out what the rest of it will mean from that. But it ties in with this.
Yeah.
We're saying redemption is there. Yeah. We're expected to get it wrong, but it's not because of original sin, just because of who we are, where our nature is.
Yeah, stain on our soul, that idea from Augustine. But there is an argument for kind of original sin, and you find it in Judaism. It goes right back to chapter 34 of Exodus, where God says, and this is a big change, I am the God of mercy and forgiveness. But nonetheless, any sins will be punished through to the 3rd generation. So there's still the harshness of the God of the mountain there, Adonai. It later became Hesed Emet, the one who loves and is faithful to that love. And then later, you've got in both, let's see, Jeremiah and one of the other prophets. But anyway, it says the identical thing, that the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are put on edge, which I always thought was not fair, you know. But what it was saying was that this is not a punishment, it's a consequence. If we adults misbehave, the kids learn from our actions far more than our words. And that's original sin, passed on that way.
That's different from.
It is different from.
You
No.
started making it down already.
Yes. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's correct. And so baptism is, of course, and also then in Judaism tradition, you had original sin was understood as a community that enslaves its children by giving them bad habits. Fathers have eaten sour grapes. That gives them bad habits. And then baptism, therefore, is providing a space, an environment in which the witness that the kids get is of the good, the beautiful, and the true. Better get back on track. Good point. Okay. There it is, isn't it? There's some things are pretty obvious. Does God love the poor? Well, he was born into poverty. He did not big note himself at any stage. Even when they tried to make him a celebrity, and you see it so often in the gospel, he says, shh, shh. If I become a celebrity, they're just going to look for the pyrotechnics. They're going to miss completely what I'm really on about. And Francis, of course, had no pyrotechnics. So, another one of these things that he had, the ecology side of it, he wanted to live lightly on the ground. And you can start thinking about who said this, because this is a quote. True ecological approach becomes a social approach, must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Laudato Si. Yeah. And Laudato Si, which of course is a phrase used by Praise Be in Francis's canticles frequently. Yeah. Social, all of us involved. Like that question of bringing everyone out of the toils of sin that enslave them, and the Christian idea of a place of what do you call it? Brain dead. Of going to purgatory, yeah. But purge means a lot of different things. It doesn't mean punishment. It means to shed, to get rid of, change the mind about. A place where they can incubate for a time, like in Hades, and those that are able can say, I was wrong, I'll go this way rather than that way, away from God, towards God, away from God. So then here's another quote. I wonder who said this. This is the modern one. Being a Franciscan is a big part of who I am. I live, breathe, and sustain my whole being with the Franciscan spirituality and values, such as, and here's another list, you can compare it with the previous one: simplicity, humility, availability, love of nature, solidarity with the poor and marginalized. This fellow is an OFM conventual, so he's he's Bishop Long, Vincent Long. He's Vietnamese. Yeah, Vietnamese. He's a refugee, but he's the Bishop of Parramatta. So he wrote that. He went on to say this: world addicted to a consumption and threatened by irreversible damage. Pope Francis' call to care for our common home has been prophetic. Almost 10 years in October, I think, since Laudato Si. And so many, and we're trying to get people in this diocese of Parramatta to deal with it, to work with it in parishes, and not. And the main opposition is from the clergy. He challenged us to embrace a new economy that shifts away from exploitation of the natural world to one that celebrates radical interdependence and reciprocity of all living beings within diverse webs of life. From exploitation, and so much of what goes on in the world is exploitation, manipulation, using, which is the name shaitan for the devil. He goes on, he said, with Francis, there was no turning back from the reforms of the Second Vatican Council. The old way of being church is steeped in a culture of clerical power, dominance, and privilege, is giving way to a new paradigm that is grounded in humility, inclusivity, accountability, and servant leadership. It's a big thing for a bishop to say. Old way of being church steeped in a culture of clerical power, dominance, privilege. Giving way very slowly. But the head of the 250,000 ton oil tanker is starting to move. One hopes, though there are a lot of people trying to grab onto that wheel and turn it back the other way. And that term, brothers and sisters for all living things, was, and even inanimate stuff, brother sun, sister moon, water and the air. He realized that all is part of God's creation. All has being. All is necessary for us. Yes, ma'am.
Anything like people learned about that he loved animals. That's all I ever learned about when I was a baby. Isn't that tragic?
Yeah.
That was it.
No. Well, the animals were just part of the ecological thing. Yeah. So there are a couple of humans in there somewhere. So unlike monastic life, which strove to domesticate nature, bring it under control, he expected to live lightly on the earth. Now, of course, the monasteries through the Middle Ages were so important. They taught agriculture, and they taught people to live, to be able to have a living wage, if you like, from the things that they learned. But it also started to become stale and old and wasn't renewed in many cases. So he wanted to be a burden to nobody and to nothing. So Jesus never told us to separate ourselves from the world. And the word to separate is sin in the Bible, is diabolos. Diabolical means to push apart. Diabolos, push apart. Symbolos, symbol, sacrament, metaphor, make one. So that's why Francis wouldn't be a monk. The friars were a new movement. They lived with the people and they were peripatetic. They were around. The Dominicans were the same. But they were two new groups in the 13th century. Francis wanted us to live in the middle of the cities, right with the people, and not to separate ourselves. And that's because he didn't hate the world. He said you had to find a way inside yourself to to love and have compassion, that splagnatsomai, that really deep love for the world, which may mean going apart for a time. So you need to have your contemplative prayer, you need to have your ordinary prayer, you need to have your retreats, going apart for a time for the purpose of prayer and contemplation in order to be able to do this in a world which doesn't like it. So he realized that he had to stay in contact with his God. Jesus didn't assume flesh to correct Adam and Eve's sin. That was Augustine of Canterbury in the 11th century, and there's one reason, and that's a reason why Augustine ain't a saint. There's complete bull dust scripture or theology, which nonetheless got a wide acceptance for centuries, that Jesus was sent by God. All right, son, I'm pissed off. Adam and Eve, they insulted me, and nobody can make it better because an insult to a God has to be repaired by a God. So you've got to go down there and you've got to get yourself murdered in order that I won't feel pissed off anymore. Stupid, 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 stupid. And we believed it for about 9 centuries. Jesus came to show us the love of God and how to respond to the love of God as a full human being, not as some sort of a half God, half man, or some sort of avatar. He became fully human because only that way could we learn how to be fully human. So Jesus would have taken flesh whether we had sinned or not. It was the intention of God right from the beginning that when sentient creatures came, God would be with us as one of us. That's why we say the Christ was from the beginning. Trinity having a council meeting, Jesus puts up his hand and says, I'll be the one. Christ. Of course, we can't understand any of this, how it works, how God works. But basically, right from the beginning, one person of the Trinity was going to do that. And the other person was sanctifier and whatever else the way it works. And if we think we can understand it fully well, you're a better man than me. Go and get in. So love, by its very nature, wants to be one, but the beloved. We do resist that still, this is God. God's out there. God's big, God's saying, come on. That's why I like the story of the shack, the first part of it before it struggles to resolve, because it just says that the persons of God are really, really loving persons and responding to the characters in the story in their own particular way that suits them. I thought that this is a wonderful effort from an author to try to get that communicated. And the suffering and death of Jesus confirms how committed he was. Because in that last act, he showed us how that when we actually come to trust God, what I was saying earlier, that we trust God not only to death, but through death, because we see death as a way to come into new life, that it's part of living, that it's a stage where we move through in order to be able to take on the new life. And it's because trusting God to and through death, as Jesus did, and it says it clearly in the 2 words from the cross that we know, that's the thing that leads God to say, arise, come into the new existence. So it can be quite exciting to come close to that if one loves God and understands how deep and committed God's love is. Yes? No? All right? How are we doing? 10:55, 11, okay. We're moving right along. Okay, so we've got a representation there of the Big Bang, the flaring forth, 13.77 billion years ago. It was a nuclear event in which we had 2 gases, hydrogen and helium, we had noise, we had heat, we had light. All of this was created, and it was full of potential, the first incarnation. It was basically God saying, you want to know who I am? Here I am, in space and time. And that was created too, space and time. And that's when we have the Christ. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So, and even before I understood that as Franciscan, I believed it myself. I thought it has to be the first incarnation. And one of the reasons I'm very interested in Franciscan spirituality, as well as teaching for the Franciscan sisters in Prairie Woods Eco Spirituality Centre in Cedar Rapids, and them sending me to Assisi for 3 weeks, is because of the connection with my own Celtic spirituality. Celtic spirituality and the Franciscan spirituality, I think, are very, very close. So, Christ's mystery, the blueprint of reality from the very start, John 1:1. He saw everything. There's one big family, God's family. That's why he called the sun and moon brother, sun, sister, moon. And Duns Scotus gave this a theological explanation by saying, in essence, oh, there's that verb again, that God's first idea was to pour out divine infinite love into finite visible forms. Pouring out divine love, infinite love, into finite forms, visible forms, space and time forms, so that we could come into existence and we could enjoy it and we could love God. Because love isn't love till you give it away. And this is what God wanted to do right from dot. The Big Bang is a scientific name for that first idea. So Christ is Christianity's theological name, understanding of God, theos logos, the meaning of God, the understanding of God. The understanding of God we have is that this idea that God wanted to be with us as one of us, to show us the love of God. And so it's terrible that we took that and said, oh no, it's a punishment thing, he's paying a debt. It's all about love flowing outwards in all directions. The last line of the Our Father, Metodilaki, Malkuta, Wahela, Watashpukta. That love, the kingdom of God, or the queendom of God really, it's a feminine noun, Malkuta, is love bursting out, flowing in all directions, bringing peace. Last line. Jesus said it, own language. So we might have persons, we might have plants, we might have rocks and stones, earth, and we might have little creatures, primitive, like an amoeba. Speak for yourself. Yep, mosquitoes even. And of course, John Duns Scotus used the Latin, he called it haexiety, thisness. Haec means this. So he said each has a certain unique something which is it and not something else. Can't be shared or described. So each individual existence is itself and therefore is absolutely precious. There's nothing else quite like it. I can remember going out into the meadowlands of Yosemite National Park underneath the big waterfall and taken a book out. It was early afternoon, just after I'd had some lunch, and I was going to have a read for an hour before getting back on the feet and walking, because all morning I've been climbing up these ruddy, great steep mountains and things. And there in front of me was Half Dome, the great rock carved in the valley, carved by a glacier millennia ago down there. And something about that rock, something thisness about it, as if there was an inner, it was more than just a rock. It was something. And anyway, I ended being there for 2 hours and not reading the book. So that hit me, that the old John Duns was not an idiot completely. He was getting something when you pay attention. So part of being part of nature, and not saying, oh, we can get rid of that, or we can get rid of that, or it doesn't matter if that species goes out of existence, is we're missing what is available to us if we just are aware and alert and stay with. And we might not be able to articulate it, but that afternoon for me was important for me in some ways, which I'm not quite sure of, but which I think was part of opening out and freeing up and whatever else you might have happened. Yeah. So, each creature of God needs to come to fullness, to find its thisness. And until we have that valuing of everything and enabling things to be what they are and to be perceived for that, can God's love be completely realized? So it's a question. So another value from that list I had earlier. So it's a theme, it's a sign of God's love. So Francis said you should multiply words and explanations and actions only when necessary. And you've probably all heard that axiom that summarizes part of the Franciscan rule. Preach the gospel at all times, and only when absolutely necessary, use words. So when I'm up here spouting words, I sometimes think of that and say, oh, oops. Simplicity. So some have said it is the perfect prayer because it is both humble and honest. So, again, what I said at the beginning, I think, was that Francis was all about orthopraxy. Ortho is right, praxis, of course, is action, right living, rather than orthodoxy, which is verbal relief. So, ortho, right, doxy, belief. So when people say faith, for instance, we have our baptismal promises, and it says at the end, this is our faith. And I think to myself, no, it isn't, not mine. These are touchstones. These are things which can be paid attention to. We're not rejecting them. So we stay with the orthodoxy. But on the other hand, my faith is expressed in how I live. That shows you what's fair dinkum when you actually do it. And that's why the original sin and the idea of the Jewish people as a community that enslaves its children by giving them bad habits. It's the actions, what the parents do, and they can preach all sorts of stuff, but if they do it, do something else, that's what the kids pick up. Yeah. So, orthopraxis first, orthodoxy is a backup to help keep us on track and to check that what we're doing is okay. We all participate. Well, that's what I'm saying. God is being and we are beings. So, even participate, I guess it's a good enough word for it, but we are of the essence of God. We are of the being of God. If you want to anthropomorphize it, we've got the DNA of God. So it's probably a little more than participating, but that will do. Okay. And he again used this word, so I'll use it because it's in the Franciscan way of teaching univocity, the one voice. Vox's voice, unus is one. So they speak as one. And he said that our being's not just analogous, but we may speak about two supposedly different beings with one voice. So that's the 13th century view of it, and I think he was very, very perceptive. Every scripture, every law, every action, history is to be interpreted in the light of the primacy of the love and Christ who is before all. Before all. So what I'm saying, I think, is the 20th century view of it, rather than talking about univocity and supposedly different beings with one voice, to say we are beings, we are of God, the essence of God. And I think that helps more for our time of understanding. What do you think? You prefer that or univocities? I mean, that's not wrong. I think it's marvellous, but it is 13th century stuff. So analogous is something that's similar to something else and can be compared to another. That's why similar, and comparison, I don't think is enough. I think we've got to make that next step beyond. Bad luck, John. Okay, another topic. Right. You're able to go on? Any conversation or discussion or something from what we've done there that's coming to your mind? Remember to butt in when it does. So, Frankie Baby had a new way of thinking there, and it was an important time because Western civilization was going to do all those things. Go into the head, leave the heart and the gut behind. Rationality. Functionality. Starting to get consumerism. If you take a look at some of the history programs and things looking at Vikings and something like that, they had a network of trade that wasn't just up in the Norse areas, but came right down even through the interior rivers into Europe and right around to the Mediterranean, down into Africa, and all, and of course places like Venice and whatever else were trading all over. Then you had Marco Polo making the Silk Road open. So it was a real breakout of all of this stuff. So you could get consumerism coming, and of course dominance, war. They were fighting each other all over the place. And in Italy, in that mid part of Italy and further to the north, you had the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. The Guelphs are the people who supported the Pope as being the dominant force throughout Europe, and the Ghibellines were those who supported the emperor. There were a couple of emperors through this time because the wars went on for a heck of a long time, but the main one was Frederick II. So, Francis was at one stage for a while, a young man, he was a soldier. And his father was rich and went on trips, right up into France even to get to source his materials, maybe even into Germany. So that was a long trip and difficult in those times, but he was active and he was successful and he was rich. Just imagine how much it cost to outfit a knight, even to buy the horse. Francis lost 2 sets of armour and 2 horses and was captured in the battle against Perugia. So you come down off Assisi and across the big wide valley, and they're up the next hill as a town they were fighting against. Normally with one town was Guelph, the other town would be Ghibelline. Stupid of human beings we can be. So he came from that very world that he was able to critique it then. But he always had a positive critique. even though they've now sort of brushed him off to the side, and we've had 8 centuries of dominance of this rationality, consumerism, war. So he didn't fight the systems directly. You do that, you get squashed. St. Patrick showed that years before, centuries before, 5th century in Ireland, where he didn't oppose the Druidic background. He actually worked with them, assumed a lot of that stuff into the Christian practice. And that enabled then the High King, the Orthodoxy, to become Christian. And some of the other chiefs then, because the kings, if you became a Christian, well, then all your people did. And so that's the way he worked. Very smart sort of fella, that Paddy boy, Podrick. So he just put things differently. Okay, we talked about it this way, and he mainly did it by living it. And we know that aphorism there, practice of the better, so people can see it. What I'm thinking and want to say to fanatical, fundamentalist Muslims these days, okay, you think your way is better? Live it. And show people how attractive it is. Then they'll come, they'll cross the border, but you can't kill them to do it or threaten them with death. Oh, right. Kill him. Same with fundamental Christians. You think you've got the right way, you live it. And if people are attracted by it, they'll come. Build it and they'll come, yeah. But no, we never do that. We try peace for 5 minutes and then we try war for 300 years. We give up on peace in 5 minutes and never give up on hatred. Just the way of it. So, as the writer Adolf Hall puts it, Francis emerged precisely when we started putting clocks into church towers. And the church towers were immense. When Christian leaders started counting, Francis stopped counting. He moved from the common economy of merit, or economy there, to the scary and very wonderful economy of grace. Grace and gift are synonyms. The gift of God to us of love, where God doesn't do any accounting, but only gives unreservedly. You look around the world and see what we're doing. Say in Gaza, we want to take. We take. Russia and Ukraine, we're taking. China, taking. Australians are probably just as bad too. And I tell the story of early in my retreat experience of having these bits of cardboard that formed a square and cut into different shapes. And then there were 6 squares and a group sitting in circles of 6, and they had a whole lot of bits and shapes in front of them. And they were told, complete your shape. And so what we all did was we sit there and we grab and we look over at someone else and grab it, and someone else and that at the same time. And we get frustrated because we weren't getting anywhere and get angry until finally retreat facilitator said, stop. Okay, you're all taking. What I want you to do now is look at the other person's square and see what they need, and if you have it. And if you have it, give it to them. The thing was out in about 30 seconds. It was amazing. And there was no anger. There's no frustration. It just give instead of take. I don't know whether kids learn anything, but I did. Okay. So, and that's Adolf Hall wrote the book, The Last Christian. It's a Doubleday publication, 1980. So, as Europe began to do the centralizing, you got the first really European kings happening, 14th century, so it was moving towards that. and organise everything at high levels of control and high levels of fashion. Francis, probably Jung would have said that his main archetype was the trickster. He basically said, right, you're doing all of this stuff, who cares? When Catholicism, under Pope Innocent III, reached the height of papal and worldly power, robes, African big things waving alongside the Sadia Gestatoria, being held up on seat carrying in triple crown. He said, in effect, there's a better way than this, much better. And so exactly when we started doing production and consumption that would eventually ravage the planet Earth, he decided to love the earth and live simply and barefoot upon it. Yep. So that didn't get very far. But he was there doing it. It was there for them to see. But as Jesus said, my mission is to help restore sight to the blind, and they didn't see him either. Even his disciples didn't see until after the resurrection. Right through the whole time, they didn't get it. So is how things getting involved here. Okay. So he was a prime attractor. Have you ever worked with prime attractors, strange attractors? Someone who moves history and humanity forward just by being who he is. But it's not a regular pattern. Attractors don't move in straight lines or round the same circle. See this one, the Lorenz attractor, follows a pattern, it settles into it, but it's not the same pattern. Every one of those circles is different, slightly different, but it's different. And it's bringing particles into a flow. And Trinity, of course, is love. It's a flow of love and of life. And this is part of, these are common in our world, physics things. So in dynamical systems, prime attractors, and you often get them mentioned in chaos theory. Bringing, and of course, right at the start of the Hebrew scriptures, Genesis 1, chaos hovered over the waters. It's a sign of things being out of line, out of whack, and then it was brought into order. You get that with Jesus, of course, in storms on the sea and all of that, the languages of chaos being brought into a line. And so these attractors are patterns of behavior. They're non-linear, that a system tends to settle into over time, and they represent stable states, cycles, or even complex chaotic patterns a system will naturally gravitate towards, regardless of its initial conditions. So if you think of Francis as somebody who was there, and the chaos around, the pushing apart, the wars, the consumerism, all of that thing, could have been brought in together if they'd paid attention into a pattern which kept its own individualism, kept its own life, kept its own flow, but which was within his way. And the same with Jesus of Nazareth. So I won't say too much more. There's three types. A limit cycle attractor is like a pendulum, but the strange attractor is it's more complex, it's more chaotic, it's where the system's behavior is highly sensitive to initial conditions and exhibits unpredictable aperiodic behavior like that. So I don't say any more of that, but he was a one who could have moved history and humanity forward if they'd paid attention. Now, to some extent, people have paid some attention, so that has happened. And you get all the different ways of Franciscanism and, well, Celtic spirituality is expressed. But that's not easy to understand, that stuff. But I put it in because, well, So this comes back to this question then of life and death too. We're only afraid of death as long as we do not know who we are. But when we know who we are, an individual with our own thisness and beloved by God, we're already home. And our inheritance is given to us ahead of time. And Jesus said that in chapter 17 of Luke's Gospel, verse 21, 22. Kingdom of God is within you and around you. Hafiz, the Sufi mystics, you expect to find God where after death you go to heaven after death. If you haven't created it around you, you're out of luck in life. Our inheritance is available for us ahead of time if we keep opening as Francis was, as Jesus was. Great gift. Isn't that wonderful? Living and enjoying instead of these things. Francis didn't climb, remember? He went down. Even Yoda with Luke Skywalker, when he had to grow up, down into the cave you must go, facing whatever is there, the enemy, you must. And he comes up and he found out what Clausewitz and other generals found out. You know, we have faced the enemy and it is us. And Luke Skywalker found that the enemy was himself. He didn't know himself. He was fighting against himself, trying to be big man, you know, proving and all the rest of it. The thing was, no, don't be aware of who you are and what gifts have been given to you. Free yourself up. That's something in prayer. We can look at that and say to God, you know, okay, God, you know, how am I climbing and proving and defending? What do I need to wake up to? Our false self, all religions say in one way, it must die before we die, and I'm coming back to then these small deaths that the experience gives us, and they're all designed to teach us that we cannot trust in ourselves anymore. I think it was Richard Rohr who said that what we do in the first half of life, one way of putting it, is to build our receptacle. And going back to chapter 10 of Jeremiah, I think, you know, the potter, build a receptacle. And then the second half of life, we have to choose what to put in it. So we must die before we die. We've got to wake up to the fact that we need to trust in God, the one who loves us and who is trustworthy, rather than saying, I am the one. Because that's idolatry, making yourself God. So, then we can say with Francis, welcome, Sister Death. So this transitus here is the passing over from life to death, and it's done in the form of when he went down to San Damiano, Claire was washing the wounds in his hands, which are constantly weeping, and taking care of him. But basically it's a metaphor saying, well, here he is welcoming Sister Death, open and ready. That's important, isn't it? We face this first death of dying to self, lose nothing that is real. We lose the unreal. And in the Canticle of the Creatures, Francis says that thing. Once we've done that, the second death can do them no harm. Right, I think that's a raw statement too. I've got a quote somewhere. Yes, in the Immortal Diamond. Death itself will only keep opening and opening and opening, which is what resurrection means. Not closing, closing, closing. I think what my mother asked me to put on her burial card or death card was something like, death is not the closing down of light, but it's putting out the light because the dawn has come. The way she saw it at the end. Right. So a couple of principles, and all of this creates a very different form and shape to our spiritual life. It's no longer elitist, separatist, or competitive. It changes our deepest imagination in terms of simplicity. Worldview. We need to place ourselves, or are placed, in new and different lifestyle situations. That's why I keep saying that experience is so vital. Experience and dealing with experience, working with experience, which is anima, soul work. And that idea of 13 ways of looking at a blackboard is the same thing. The thing is, of course, that a point of view is a view from a point. Unless you go to another point, you're not going to change your view. So experience is so vital. Again, Mr. Rohr, I think, you do not think yourself into a new way of living, you live yourself into a new way of thinking.
I think the original statement should have been still. I think if I am, that's what I think.
Yes. I'd like to change that. That's René Descartes in 1622. I relate, therefore I am. I relate. And the relating, of course, is Jesus' way of relating, looking at the cardia, the heart, the gut, the mind of the person. Therefore I am, because that's how I do that. Again, it's a praxis. How I relate really describes who I am to all things. It does certainly with Francis. That's why this thing about animals got such a dominance. Okay. So he was down in San Damiano and he got the call, Francis, rebuild my church, coming from that particular form of the cross, which we now know as the Franciscan cross, unusual shape there, and he thought it meant literally instead of metaphorically. So out he went to the most immediate source of funds available, his father's fabric. So he rode to a nearby. He entered the warehouse of Pietro Bernardone, stole 2 bolts of expensive cloth, went off to a nearby village and sold them both, the fabric and his horse. And then he had a big purse of gold and he went off on foot for the crumble down church of San Damiano to give the money to the priest. Now, Bernardone's wrath was infamous, and the priest said, I'm not, you can imagine, in the Sicily, and the Godfather, stealing from the Godfather and then trying to use, no, I'm not doing that. So, so he refused the money. Then Francis's father came back from France with more cloth and found that his warehouse had been raided, and he did it at Mount St Helens, and exploded, and he'd had enough, because the Francis had been a bit outrageous for the hard-earned wealth. He was a rich boy. Didn't try to hide it. Diamonds on the soles of his shoes. Not quite, but there you are. He'd squandered, as I said, large amounts of money entertaining himself and his friends, fortunes. He'd lost the armour and the horses. He'd had to be ransomed from Perugia, huge amount of money to bail him out. He'd allowed Francis to do nothing for 2 years because of the sickness he got while he was incarcerated. So now he's stealing from his father for some crazy new whim of that kid, and he wasn't having any. Anyway, he found his son, went out and found him begging in the streets for stones to rebuild the church. I've got to do something about this. So he hauled him before the bishop. And the bishop, Guido, was also famous for a temper, but he was very kind to Francis. He was, and Francis went willingly because he was still orthodox enough for that. He saw the bishop as a representative of God. And so the bishop tried to reason with him, saying that he'd scandalized his father, that God wouldn't want him to use stolen stuff in God's name. He said, that's, crazy. So my son, said the bishop, have confidence in the Lord and act courageously. God will be your help and will abundantly provide you with whatever is necessary. So fairly pompous and fairly predictable. God will provide you with everything. But Francis said, okay. So he promptly stripped off his clothes, gave them back to his father along with the purse of gold, and then said, right, Pietro Benedetto is no longer my father, God is. Pretty direct and pretty, in a way we could say, oh, that's cruel and wrong and stuff, but there it was. And you find, Jesus saying, you put the hand to the plough and look back, you have to leave mother and father and follow me. It was something that he did, and he did it literally at that stage. And the bishop took his own cloak and put it around him, and but off he went. And so that was not, of course, what Pietro Bernardoni wanted to happen. He just wanted his son back. But Francis was released into the service of humanity and was lost to Pietro forever. Sacrifice. And it wasn't the most important turning point in his life, but it was a key one. If faith really said, I will trust in God. And he did. And that meant he had to leave all of what he had had before. So it must have been incubating in him in some way. But he also had this mortal fear of lepers. He was afraid of death and of dying in such a horrible fashion. It's like somebody who's afraid of spiders, there's one on the wall, there's a big huntsman, or a cave full of the things, It was really rabid. Okay. So he did all of that. Okay, now we come to Wolfie Baby, and it's 11:30, so why don't we take a break before we get eaten by the wolf?